All right, good afternoon, everybody. I've been meaning to make this video for a while, but there's some things that are going on with the Supreme Court regarding the Brian Kirk Malpazzo versus William M. Pelosi. And if anybody don't know who those people are, from my understanding, Malpazzo is the person that applied for a Maryland wear and carry permit, as what we call it in Maryland, and was denied because he did not have good and substantial reason. And on the issuing licenses here for the HQL process and for the license itself, the superintendent is William M. Pelosi, that is currently the respondent that is defending their current Maryland scheme. And what you have to realize in Maryland is, unlike other 42 states, is that they cannot make laws on the books where they can basically say you do not have a right to bear arms or keep arms. But I mean, even though they do have the assault weapons ban, which they can basically define anything as an assault weapon, they can define something as an assault magazine. That's another topic, though. But they basically have the schemes, such as Maryland and also New Jersey and New York, where they're basically nobody can carry in those states, or very few people as possible, and they have these certain schemes. Now, just to give you an update on the case, is that they basically opened up a Supreme Court took interest into the case, and they filed for the writ of certiorari about September 26th. They just petitioned for it. They didn't receive anything. And then Alabama and a few other states put out their brief also. And then recently, William M. Pelosi responded. But this is basically coming from our Maryland Attorney General office. And basically, he is somebody that really is anti-gun, but really anti-life, I would say, because of the simple fact of the way they have the laws in Maryland is not just where they're anti-gun or they're anti being able to bear arms. It's anti-life, because one thing that you have to realize is that in Maryland we have a law called duty to retreat. And basically, in layman's terms, that means you need to expend your energy in order before you are justified or allowed to use deadly force. So if you have a killer or a rapist trying to attack you, then you must expend your energy to get away with it, do everything possible before you're allowed to use deadly force. Now, a lot of people seem to think that sounds better than on paper than stand your ground, but that really doesn't give you any leeway to protect your children. If there is a mass shooter that is shooting up the place, and if you are able to stop the threat and save lives, they did not basically allow you to do that in the law. But that's one thing about Maryland, is that they like a lot of case law, where basically your fate is determined on a panel of juries. So think about it. In this case, usually where you have stand your ground, you are able to. You don't have to. You just have to prove that you were justified in self-defense. Now you have to say, did you do enough to get away, or such and such. And that's one major thing. Now, as far as the update, going back up to the update on the carrying scheme, is that I put this out now because the Supreme Court basically they've gotten all their respondents, and all of the paperwork's been put in, and they replied to it. And basically they're going to distribute this for conference as of January 24 of this year, in 2020. And the interesting thing about this that I don't think a lot of people are picking up with the Supreme Court is that they have been looking into a lot of Second Amendment cases. And what I mean is that they could take any one of these, or they might just rule on the New York Rifle and Pistol Association. But I believe they want to get all the information as possible in order to be able to knock this out of the woods, because there's also other cases, such as the New Jersey case, where their gun permit laws are a lot more restrictive, where I believe in 1 year they've only had 1,000 permits. In a population of 9 million people, that is basically like what, 1 0.001% or something like that. It's ridiculous. But they've also looked into the DC case where it is basically hell on earth trying to purchase a pistol there because of an old law saying you have to purchase your pistol or receive it from your home state. And something about DC where they don't have gun stores and you or something of the sort, and you have to basically go through a FFL, and they barely have any FFLs there, so you have to pay a steep price of like $150. And things like this, these laws have been staying in place because these courts have been ruling on it. And it's been basically a lot of backwards logic where they will, and literally it goes like this. They say 1 + 1 is 2. So you have 1 and 1, so that makes 11. So 1 + 1 equals 11. And what I mean by that is that basically when Justice Scalia and the other justices, the court through that time said for Heller, you have a right to keep arms. They basically expanded on that. And basically New York and Maryland and a few other states have been getting around that by saying that, okay, if you have a right to keep arms, we'll just instead do what they call regulate it, which is basically saying we're going to make it as hard as possible or as expensive as possible for you to be able to purchase a handgun or even a long gun. And so that way, you know, basically the rich will be able to carry and the poor is going to have to suffer. And that's basically what's been happening in Baltimore. I believe we're up to 342 deaths. And you can obviously see that it's not getting better, even though that's not the record amount of deaths, the highest. Well, we almost passed it. But think about it, is that if you put that into consideration, this is when the population is lower. So the deaths are around the same, but the population is lower, which means that the murder rate actually is really going up, considering that there's less people here, less people alive. Now, what you have to realize is with this, with basically how he responded, how they responded to this one. Let me pull this page up here, because his name escapes me for some reason. Our Attorney General's office, basically, they've basically tried to put the blame. They've lied a little bit. They've admitted some of the truth to the Supreme Court, and they're trying to put the blame on the circuit court. So basically, there's a split in the circuit courts, and basically, like the first, second, and third have ruled that you don't have, or you have a limited right to bear arms. Another circuit once doesn't even want to hear it. The seventh and DC circuit said that yes, you have a right to bear arms. And this is how we have, if you look on the map, if you go like usually at CCA and look at the shall issue versus may issue states, you'll see that most of them are in the Northeast. And then you also have a case that the Supreme Court's looking at too, the Ninth Circuit, which also other states like Florida, and I think South Carolina does it, is that they're trading in their open carry for concealed carry. So basically they're saying like, no, you cannot open carry anymore. You can only conceal carry. And going back to that 1 + 1 statement I made, is that they're basically, these courts have been running amok for the last 10 years trying to get as many laws on the books or trying to interpret it as how they see fit. And they have basically said like, look, Heller said that the way Heller described it as far as interpreting legislation, making new gun legislation, is that you look at the historical context of how people were of the Second Amendment, and then you can use tiers of scrutiny. And tiers of scrutiny is basically the government's need to say why do they need to have a law or the exception to the law in place. So let's say if we banned fishing, fishing with nets, and they put a law saying ban fishing with nets, but the government says, or, basically that we need to make an exception for Native Americans because that was part of their tradition. And they use certain tiers of scrutiny from basic to intermediate to strict scrutiny, but I believe they use intermediate scrutiny. And their laws, the way they've been trying to get around this, have been getting weaker and weaker. They're saying like concealed carry holders are subject to the same stuff that everyday drivers are. So everyday drivers get road rage, concealed carriers could get road rage. But they're having a harder time defending this because actually, if you look at the the comparison between offenses from concealed carry holders and police officers, they're actually lower than police. So statistically, right now, you're actually safer with concealed carry holders than police. Now, that going back to this scheme that we have in Maryland is that you would think that after putting their major gun legislation was back in, I want to say, 2013, where they had the Maryland Safe Act. That's where they tried to completely outrule 10-round magazines, even though you can go outside the state and you can still keep them. You just can't purchase them or transfer them inside the state. They had their assault weapons banned. They had all that stuff. So basically, the murder rate pretty much went up past 300 the years afterwards, and they want to put more legislation on the table, and the murder rate goes up. So you have to ask if they're intentionally trying to call us. They're trying to kill us here, because if they keep doing something and then the attendant consequence keeps happening, would you think they would change their ways? And to be honest, there has been stories of that happening where, they've gone around and changed it, made the gun restriction less restrictive. If you look at Michigan, they used to have strict laws on the books, and they changed it around, and Detroit has actually been a better place to live. That's not the case for Baltimore here. And another part in the scheme is that what they basically told the Supreme Court is that saying like, yeah, we don't allow people to carry pistols here without a license unless for specific events, which really it's really a gray area. But I'll talk about that later. But we do allow people to carry rifles. Now, like I said, what a lot of people don't realize is that not only do these laws happen to affect a lot of the impoverished communities, especially African American males who are suffering the most from these gun crimes, but and also to the point of dealing out most of the gun crimes. But these laws, in effect, not only against the Second Amendment, not only against the 14th Amendment for equal protection. This is ageist if you think about it, because as an elderly person here, and I've talked to elderly people, is that, I've talked to some elderly people decide to carry anyway because they don't want to get beat. They don't want to get knocked up in the head. You see, they won't just take you out with guns. Some people will take you out with their bare hands here. And some elderly people, I remember, was just basically had to beg to the Maryland State Police. And there was one, I want to say, a retired Marine general, served the Marine for 30 years. And he said, look, you can put all the restrictions you want on my license. I just want to be able to walk my dog and walk with my wife. My neighborhood's been getting bad. And they did not honor him. They did not give him the permit. So basically, if you're looking to live here as an elderly person, you're going to have to be able to have some type of physical exercise if you want to be able to live a long life. And basically, they're saying the only way you're going to be able to protect yourself in public is carry a rifle. And that night rifle has to be over 29 inches long. And, the thing about it is you see some of these old people, the way they're built, you think they're going to be able to carry around a rifle all day, especially with bad back and osteoporosis, all that stuff. So I think that's one thing that they don't look at, is that Maryland heavily discriminates against the elderly people. Also, with the carrying scheme, like I said, going back to the HQL process, is that it's expensive. Going through it is very expensive. You have to pay a certain amount of money just in order to take a class. I want to say it's about $150 on average to take the class. Then you're going to have to pay Maryland in order to do a background check on you, which is going to take 30 days. And then they'll approve you or not. So when you go to purchase your first pistol, you're going to have to go through a 7-day waiting period. And then you're going to have to pay an extra $10 on the tax stamp. So not only is it affecting the elderly people, it's affecting the poor people that need it the most. And the way Maryland has been getting around that is by heavily playing the gentrification game, where they will lower taxes or put these Section 8 communities out in the neighboring counties. Because if you look at it, most of the bad stuff is happening in Baltimore City, and a lot of the and a lot of the more wealthier folks are just moving out. But I digress on that subject. Now, if you carry a rifle in public, a few years ago, you would just be harassed by the cops. But now, what you have to realize is that with the red flag law in process, and that in Maryland also has the award for being the only state to murder somebody within 30 days of issuing a red flag law, is that they can just red flag you. They can take away your gun, say that you're a danger to the public, and you don't have to, like I said, it's legal in the books to open carry a rifle in public. And that doesn't even count in your car. I believe it has to be unloaded, locked, and, with the magazine detached and all that other stuff. So really, even defending yourself in cars, there's really no way without getting the permit. And thing about the permit, which basically, and I say, and this is what Maryland says, in Maryland, omission of the truth is considered lying. So they basically admitted this truth to the Supreme Court, that they put restrictions on license. See, if you get a carry permit here, the only way you're gonna get it unrestricted is if your life is in danger, and that's even another subject to talk about, because the thing about having your life in danger is that they think they do not make any clause of saying that of expediting the process, because they give you like 90 days of the whole process. So if they think that the threat's going to go away in 90 days, they might not give it to you. But if you do, you get an unrestricted permit, and then that doesn't guarantee you for it to get renewed. Secondly, there's a short risk profession, and it's the most messed up one, because this is basically their backdoor way for their politicians that are making these laws, and for the police that are enforcing these unconstitutional laws, to be able to get the permit while they make everybody else suffer here. And the third one is business owners. And what people don't realize about the business owners, that Maryland police screwed up, and they falsely accused somebody recently of not being able to carry. They said basically that he was not on business, conducting business to while he was carrying. He got pulled over by a cop. And it was about, basically, they won't arrest you, from my understanding. They will put a prosecutor into your case, and an investigator, and then they'll see whether you're conducting business or not. And if they think that you are, then they'll arrest you and try to sentence you for a year or 3 years in prison. And Maryland doesn't see anything wrong with that. They do not at all. So because they screwed up, the police basically went back on it, and they basically said, yeah, we're gonna make business owners unrestricted. So basically, and it's kind of weird, because I don't want to get too political here, but the political political side that's usually putting this stuff out, they're the ones that's usually the ones that are against the rich having certain privileges. But basically, you have to have some money in order to be able to get an unrestricted permit here. That goes the same for New Jersey. And bring up some of these other states. New Jersey, in order to get a permit there, you have to be approved by the police, and then you have to be approved by a judge. And the thing about it is that the way New Jersey got away with the courts of explaining why they should have these unconstitutional laws is because they said, historically wise, going back to the historical part of how Heller described it, is that because they've had this for 90 years, that justifies it. And basically, what they had back there, New Jersey had an issue of people paying off judges on the side, and then the judges would approve their permits to be able to carry in self-defense. And New Jersey was like, that's not going to happen anymore. We're going to cut that out very quick. And now New Jersey's like, basically loading the judges' pockets to be able to make sure as few people carry as possible. Now, also, you have to realize is that what people say is that in their logic, they say, yeah, you don't need a gun, you have the cops. But thing about it is that with the cops in Maryland, and this, I'm not saying bringing any other state into guards, but even though the Supreme Court ruled, I want to say back in 2005, the police do not have an obligation to save your life. That's one thing you have to realize as an individual. And I can say personally from experience, from first person experience, is that after the Freddie Gray situation happened here, the police stopped responding actively to shootings and stuff like that. They would just come afterwards and clean the mess. That's where a lot of the murder rates went up. It wasn't because of Freddie Gray, but it was because the police just basically said, okay, y'all don't like us, then we're going to stop coming. And then they still deny you the permits. So basically, your life is in the police hands here, who in Baltimore, I'm talking about specifically Baltimore City, not the county. Baltimore City police has just been dropping the ball. The clearance rate, meaning the rate of which they have a suspect, is around like what, 30 something percent. So chances are your murderer is going to be able to get away here. You can murder somebody and get away here in Baltimore. That's how crazy it is. But the thing about it is that that's part of the scheme, and that's where the Supreme Court comes in, is that they basically said that the police don't have a duty to protect you, so the police don't come to save your life, but they also are the ones that are holding your permits here in the state of Maryland. So it's an endless cycle. I'm gonna be honest with you. And even like I say, even if you get a permit, going back to the restrictions, is that they personalize these restrictions. And one way the Attorney General of Maryland basically admitted the truth, is saying that they restrict your permit. So like if you don't fall under those categories of unrestricted permits, and if you get a restricted permit here, they can restrict the time of day, they can restrict where you go to, they can restrict how long, they can restrict where you're at, they can restrict where it's for. And you would think, oh, okay, well, yeah, there's restrictions. But the thing about it is that I can tell you personally is that getting a restricted license, when I received mine, they put restrictions on my license that was different than my coworker. So the thing is that we have the permit, got the permit for the same reason, but have two different restrictions, and it makes it scary, because the thing about it is that you're carrying, you don't know how vague they make it vague as possible. So basically you have to go to the police, and you have to deal with the police, and if you get pulled over or something like that, then you're at risk of you're just wondering there, sitting there wondering if they're going to convict you or not, or just say that this isn't a valid permit. They can say your permit is good until 8 p.m. and if for some reason you get caught in traffic, you're carrying at 8:01 p.m., then your permit is not valid. So in that case, I hope that the New York Rifle and Pistol Association will be able to clarify this. But the Supreme Court is looking into all of these cases because they've been running amok. And I think a lot of the legislators know this. This is why they threatened the Supreme Court recently before this New York Rifle and Pistol Association. They threatened to replace or pack the court with people that think their way. But they didn't I don't think they took too much. I'm not sure how they reacted to it. I'm not sure what they're going to do with this New York, whether they're going to claim it moot or not. I hope not. But like I said, the Maryland case is in. So we're just going to have to wait and see. They can pull either any one of these cases or look at all of these situations and just make the ruling on New York Rifle and Pistol Association. Now, which one they will take, I don't know. But what seems to happen is, what recently has been happening is, if you look at Illinois, is that in regards to how strict their gun laws are, is that Illinois actually gun laws are not as strict as what they used to be. If you look back at 2009, they had some of the most restrictive laws on books, where they had handgun bans, where they had carry bans, and that's what initiated the McDonald case. I want to say back in 2011 to apply the Second Amendment to state level. And from that point on, what's been going on is, because even after that, they weren't shall issue. I think they were probably no issue as far as their carry permits, but they knew that since they weren't issuing permits, if they believe that the Supreme Court is going to catch whiff of this, they will take their laws and take it off and repeal their laws and basically say, okay, you got me, we removed the laws. So basically, these gun control advocates know that these laws are unconstitutional. They don't care. I don't think they, looking at how strict the laws are in Maryland, you have one thing about registering pistols is that I don't believe criminals have to register pistols. I don't believe so. It would have to deal with something. I believe the Fifth Amendment, of basically just incriminating yourself. That's why I believe in Maryland, and like I said, other states are different, but specifically in some of these restrictive states like Maryland and New Jersey, if you are carrying, you do not have to tell an officer that you are carrying, because basically so few permits are admitted that basically you could basically be admitting guilt, or they could force you to admit guilt at that point. Especially, like I say, if you have a restricted license, if they think that you're carrying under your restrictions. And like I said, some states say that you have to notify an officer that you're carrying. Now, also, one thing in Maryland is that they do have some communist laws on the books where police can stop and frisk you for any reason. I believe I saw that on Maryland statute. I remember people were against it, but I'm not sure if the law was actually passed or not. But I did see it in their statute that if a police wants to, they can stop and frisk you or search you to see if you have a firearm on you. So in regards to this is how they make these laws where there are no carry, where basically they have it where few people as possible can carry. And we already know, I don't think that this is going to last forever. Like I said, is that I can't reiterate this enough, is that I believe what is going on with the Supreme Court is that they are looking into all of these cases, with the DC case on handgun purchasing, with our case, a New Jersey case on may issue, or basically no, New Jersey is basically no issue. They might be looking into the Illinois case, where basically, Maryland doesn't have reciprocity with anybody, but Illinois, the way that they do their reciprocity, they don't have reciprocity either. But the way they do is that they only allow states with specific criteria in order to apply for their license. And basically, if those criteria change out of nowhere, your license can become invalid. Now, I think that's messed up, and I think that's a lot different from reciprocity. It's one thing to say, like, Minnesota is one of the hardest states to get reciprocity for. Unless you apply for their license personally, the only way you're going to be able to get an out-of-state license, I believe, for Minnesota, from a state that Minnesota does not honor, is if you get your Idaho permit. And they only accept certain criteria. So if that criteria changes, like Minnesota doesn't honor Maryland's permit because Maryland offers the wear and carry permit to people under 19. Minnesota doesn't have any exceptions for 21. But they can just basically say, okay, we don't honor Maryland permits anymore. But Illinois basically says your Illinois carry permit is not valid here. So at one point, it was Hawaii and a few other states that they recognized for their citizens to get out-of-state permits. And then they just made them invalid. And now it's like Virginia, Arkansas, Texas, and another state. I want to say Mississippi or something like that. But it's crazy. And like I said, I think there's going to be a light at the end of all of this. Who's to blame? Really, one thing that this is the last point I'll make about this scheme is that it is a spider web, and it's made to be that way, like I said, because they cannot just outright ban your Second Amendment right. Because think about it is that your Second Amendment does not give you the right to bear arms. That was noticed. The right to be able to bear arms was known before the Constitution was made. The Second Amendment restricts the federal government and now the state to be able to infringe on your right. So it was known as a innate right beforehand. But to say who's to blame in this is that, first of all, and like I said, my opinion has changed over time because I had to look at things, and Maryland shall issue has a lot of good information on it. First of all, one thing also put this in perspective is the governor has a lot to deal with this. What's I see that none of them mentioned to the Supreme Court is that depending on what kind of governor you have is depending on how these licenses are issued, like who they issue the license to. When Martin O'Malley was the governor here, he basically said that we're going to issue, and this is coming from the previous superintendent. I forgot his name. I'll probably put a link in the description. He said that we want to issue as few permits as possible to people. Now, under Hogan's administration, he has been a lot more lenient, and but still, he still has the power to, make executive action and go shall issue. He's just a rhino, really. But the thing is that it depends on, if you have a Republican governor, the laws can be looser. If you have a Democratic governor, the laws can be stricter. You might not get your permit approved to be renewed, and they're not going to give you back your money. You can go through all the training and pay $300, and that's one thing to take into account. The next thing is that the Maryland State Police is that, I will say this, and this is to their defense, is that the drones, or the ones that are working on the field, a lot of them are the ones that are a little bit more stricter. I will say the ones that are issuing these permits, they're under a lot of pressure right now. And basically is that if they start issuing permits willy-nilly, the politicians could take them and relocate them to another district. And I didn't really sit down and realize that to the previous superintendent that was running the licensing division was talking about this, is that they put a lot of the responsibility on them who they issue out permits to, and it makes them fearful that they issue a permit to the wrong person and then that person does something wrong. So in that regards, like I say, a lot of it's coming from the legislators. It's coming a lot from the legislators. And then also there's also the people that they vote for. So some people are voting for, some people say, well, they're just going to say it regardless. They believe that it's almost like flat earthers, they're going to say regardless of how many deaths, if the death rate goes up, they say they want guns off the street. Then more people get shot. They say they need to do more. More people get shot. They put more laws on the books and the death toll keeps going up, or it stays the same, but there's less people here, so it's technically going up. So then you have, like I said, you have some people that just think that way. They can't be changed, or they want to give up their rights. But that doesn't mean that they have the right to infringe on other people's rights. That's pretty much all I have. Like I said, there's probably some things that I'll probably look back and I'll miss and say, oh man, I probably wanted to say that. I know this video is pretty long, but yeah, it is a huge spider web what's going on here in Maryland. And the fact that they have been doing the same thing and expecting a different process over the years, not only is it pure insanity, you have to honestly think that it's not out of line to think that they're intentionally killing people off in the city, because the murder rate's ridiculous. And like I said, the cops don't have to come and save your life here, and they have done that. When I was security, also, they basically, the cops told us and told our company that do not call the cops if there are people shoplifting anymore. And I worked at a grocery store in Canton or around that area, and basically I had one person, I had somebody come in and assault another person, beat them up. And I mean, I got them off them, but the thing was, I called the cops. They responded very slowly. I had one person that threatened, and he was an old guy, but he threatened to stick up the store. I mean, he was just old. He was delusional, but he had his hand in the cereal box and pretend like he had a gun. And we called the cops, so then the cops took a long time to respond. So the Supreme Court owes us on this one. They really do, because if the cops aren't liable to protect us, then at least the people should be liable to protect ourselves and protect each other in case of confrontation. So I'm gonna leave it at that. I'll probably make one more video about how to get reciprocity from living in the state with crappy or no reciprocity, because that is a nightmare. I will tell you this. I have right now, I have about 3 permits, and I'm looking to get a 4th one. And thing about it is that now it's like getting the permits are for individual states. So stay tuned with that. That's going to be the last video I make. But y'all stay safe out here, because my gosh, it's horrible here in Baltimore.